All right. Yay! Hey, everyone. We are finally live. So, this is Redemption, Alabama, which I was so excited to get to do with my friend Perry Cox, who is, I can't wait to hear the story. He's a relation to Governor George Wallace, and I've seen him participate in all the Black Lives Matter protests. So, um, take it away. We are excited to have you. Thank you so much.
Well, the pleasure is mine to be here, and I appreciate you for giving me the opportunity to have a platform to say whatever's on my heart. I think we should begin by explaining the less than perfect lineage to George Wallace. George Wallace's wife, Lurleen Burns Wallace, was her father and my grandfather were first cousins. Lurleen Burns Wallace was George Wallace's first wife, and she was a reluctant governor candidate in 1966. To understand Alabama, to understand racism and racist politics in the state, it is important to know the story of George Wallace. Everything that happened as in segregation in Alabama, whether it's the schoolhouse door, whether it's the Montgomery bus rides, which happened before his administration, sort of culminate in the governorship of George Wallace. And it is to be an Alabamian, and perhaps even to be a Southerner, and maybe even to be an American, there will be an inherent racism that exists, even though some of us will not admit it, and some of us really don't want to admit it. Some of us have pride in our Southern heritage, and what that generally means is my family owned slaves. There are people that find that, and to reluctantly and not so reluctantly, to be proud of that fact. There's also people who love to tout that their ancestors fought in a particular in the Civil War, and usually someone will lie about having an officer as a relation. And I have been one of those people. I have definitely in my lifetime taken pride in my ancestors' role in the Civil War, or in anything that we now would regard to be shameful, whether it is plantation ownership, slave ownership. Those things did not seem to mean that much to me. I remember going down to the courthouse when I was a little boy. In the county that I grew up in, there was a statue as a Confederate monument, and it was explained to me when it was there and how my family contributed to it being there, and I took that as a source of pride. And I never thought, we were taught that certain words weren't the things to say. You didn't use derogatory remarks to people of other races. That was low class to do. You didn't use the N word or whatever you want to say. You didn't say that. You could use other words, but you didn't say that. But you referred. It was definitely an attitude of superiority, in that there were certain things that you should be, and certain things that you shouldn't be. You shouldn't. I remember my mother, whose attitude has changed now. So please understand that through time she's become a completely different person, and I guess we all have. But I remember her telling me, I don't care who you bring home, as long as he's not a man and as long as he's not black. Well, I have blown all that out of the water. But that is. But anyway,
Love it.
But I mean, this was the attitude, like this, and it's more about. It's not just about that. It was more about also about social standing. It was also about, this is just not what you do. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, why does racism exist in America? Why is it prevalent more in America than other countries? Why have other countries moved on at a better rate, at least, than we have? And without trying to be your historian, to begin to understand racism in America, you literally have to go back to colonial times, and you literally have to go all the way back to Jamestown. And I know this may sound, what does this have to do with Alabama redemption? It has everything to do with Alabama. Everything. If you aren't familiar with it, I can't give it justice in however much time we have here. But in a nutshell, we know that slaves came to America in 1619 in 1607 rather, with the settlement in Jamestown. However, they were not the predominant working force. Poor people were the predominant working force. If you were wealthy and could afford a ticket to America, you were given 50 acres of land, prime land, along the Tidewater region of Virginia and Maryland. If you could not, you could become an indentured servant and pay for that. And it was a $50 ticket, if I'm not mistaken, but it may be more than that. I can't remember. But anyway, if you could not, you were given a ticket and you paid your way. You worked for the man once you got there. You worked for the plan. You worked for the wealthy landowners. Also, if you were in debtor's prison and you needed to pay off your debt, you were given voyage to America, and the landowner, you would work for him for a number of years until your debt was paid off, both to him for the voyage and whatever people you owed in England. The funny thing that we never seem to talk about is that indentured servitude was also a thing for black people and white people. It was not just slavery as we know it as today. It wasn't even referred to as slavery. It was referred to as indentured servitude, because some of the people, and I do not think this is one of those white justifications for slavery, but in the same situation, they were purchased in Africa. And I mean, I'm not trying, I know white people say, well, no one was stolen from the coast. That had not happened yet. It was on the way, but it had yet to happen, not at the level that it would happen later. And this is where it begins. So
and you're talking about 1607, around that time.
This is really 1670s. 1670s. By 70 years after the settling of Jamestown, things are beginning to really blossom for Virginia. All right, so you got poor black people and poor white people who are working together. They live out the wealthy people live in the Tidewater region, where the land is fertile and good, and the poorer people live out in the mountainous regions, and they are the buffers. They're really the buffers to the Indians that live out there, the Native Americans. And the black people live with the white people out in there and come in, and there are no quote unquote slave houses as of yet, though the landowners sometimes own the homes, because to get your 50 acres of land after a time, you have to work for the landowner. So they own the home that you live in, which is another story. But at the present time, black people and white people in 1670s and 1650s, 60s, and 70s America are working together, and they're living together, and they're marrying, not so common law marriage. They don't have a marriage. They can't marry. No one's stopping them from living together and having children together, and it's happening. So this guy named Nathaniel Bacon he's an outcast from the wealthy people, and he's decided that he wants to change things. And so he gets an army of whites and blacks, and he burns Jamestown to the ground, with white and black people coming together. Well, nothing more fearful than the poor people coming together. That's the scariest thing ever. So they decided at that point in our history to establish social class as racism. White people were disgruntled as being separate and equal to Africans. So they created African slaves. It's also easier to keep up with. White people would pay for indentured servitude. They would get to the coast and they would go off elsewhere. It was easier to keep track of black people. So it was done intentionally. They became known as slaves. They also, since the white person did not have, they were also not paying, because if you work for someone, you work a debt off after 10 years. Let's say you work 10 years, and now it's time for you to get your 50 acres of land. Here's your 50 acres of land, Bob. All right, well, what do? Everything you've had at that point has belonged to the wealthy man, right? You have 50 acres of land, but you don't have tools. You don't have animals to work the farm. You don't have anything. So they intentionally created the middling class, is what they called it. And they did that and made them just a little bit better than black people and taught them, because the black people were slaves. And so now what we have done is the classic European example of, let's focus on what makes us separate instead of what makes us equal. Because if you concentrate on being poor and your rise again, and you want equal wages and equal land and whatever you want to call it from the wealthy, you rise up, there's more of y'all than there are of us. So let's create a system where there are poor people and there are poorer people. While we might have to give up a little, but we still have our wealth, but we don't have to worry about this class of poor people getting together and trying to take it away from us. So the mentality begins. Now that the laws come into effect where white people cannot marry, common law or otherwise, with black people. White people cannot have children with black people legally. All of these things begin to come into action. A separation is created and racism exists. I hope I've explained that as best as I can. But if you want to find it, it's everywhere. It's just a YouTube search away, and they explain it great. Now, as time goes by, an entire wealth is created in the South off of the backs, off of oppression. And while there are poor white people, that have no slaves, couldn't have no desire to, couldn't have them if they wanted them. They couldn't afford to purchase a man, which sounds horrifying to even talk about, but it's the truth. When the Civil War comes out, there's a lot of people in the South who don't want any part of it, because they look at it and even then they try to glorify it. Well, let's have our own nation, the Southern nation. It's all about states' rights, and they try to make it have pride in your particular state, whether it's South Carolina or Virginia or Florida or Alabama or Mississippi. But everyone didn't fall into that, and they didn't buy it, because I'm fighting a war for the wealthy landowner. I don't own that kind of land. This has nothing to do with me. When this war is over, who benefits? So once again, let's make this about racism. Let's make this about one person being better than the other. Throughout time, throughout the past 400 years, we have this ingrained in us and taught in us, whether they mean to or not, that it is perfectly okay to use a person of color. My priest father, Tommy Watkins Jr., is a wonderful man, and he has explained it no better than a black man is okay as long as we use his body.
I love Father Tommy.
As long as we put him in a uniform, as long as whether it's a sports uniform, a musician's uniform for entertainment purposes, or a police or a fireman. Let's use him to do the jobs that put them in harm's way, or to entertain us or protect us. But we do not want him, or even as he has said, a pastor's uniform, a priest, a cleric's collar. But let's not, for the love of God, make him wealthy. Let's not make him equal. The whole thing is, how can the rich remain rich? How can anyone, as long as if poor people acquire the same level of education, rights as the wealthy? It's just not possible. So I was not necessarily raised in particular wealth, but I was wealthier. We were better off than some, and we were certainly taught to believe that you just didn't mingle. You didn't have black friends. You didn't have any of that.
Can I ask you a question real quick? When
Sure.
you said that about you didn't have black friends, what is I hear you saying that it's wealth, like you don't want the other wealthy or to obtain wealth or education. But is there a deeper fear of the black?
Sure. Yeah, it's a fear that if you're poor, at least you're not a black man. That was the Southern mentality. I might be poor, and I might not even be, I may be barely literate, but I'm not a black man. because Jim Crow comes along, and I mean the Civil War was when it was won, and the rights that were given to African Americans were out amazing. I mean, to think about where you were in 1864 as versus where you were in 1865 was fabulous. Black people had the right to vote. Black people were serving as governors, and they were installed as governors and congressmen and judges throughout the South. And then in 1867 or 68, laws were enacted to start to change all of that. This is where Jim Crow comes to bring the black man back down. We cannot have this race of people to be on equal footing and equal standing as the rest of us. So Jim Crow laws, terroristic laws, and terroristic actions were put into place so that black people would not be interested in voting. They didn't want them to vote Republican. At that time, at that time you wanted to be Republican. At that time, if you voted Republican, that meant that you supported black people having rights. So, and black people voted predominantly Republican. So you don't want them to vote because we want the Democrats, who are more sympathetic to the white cause. We don't want them voting. So you institute poll taxes or land taxes, and you put all these regulations on voting, and you make it illegal and you make sure you don't educate black people, because in order to vote, in order to hold office, you have to have an education. So these are laws that are put into places, and they vary throughout the South, not just from state to state, but from county to county and region to region. So all of this is done. If you decide to step out of line in that, you are something absolutely horrific is done to you, whether it's lynching or worse. Believe it or not, it can get worse than that. People were burned alive in horrific ways as a statement. Stay in your place. Don't you even think about coming out of your place. And it worked. And that's terrible. And when you think about the concept of time, how long ago has that been? So I'm 47. My grandmother was born in 1900. So in 1900, when she was born, and for the better part of her life until she passed away, these laws were in effect. I knew her. I loved her. I mean, how long ago does it take in the scheme of history for a race of people, whether they're white or black, for humanity to get over the things that have been inherently taught them for hundreds and hundreds of years? How long does that take? While we make all these milestone, while we regard ourselves as making all of these changes, and we do all these wonderful things, at what point do we start to think differently? We can have a black congressman, judge, president. We can have a female black mayor. We can do all of these wonderful things. But at what point do we start to think differently? At what point do I look at myself and say, I have some really messed up thinking? While I'm looking at everyone else, at what point do you say, I can't change everybody, but I can change me. And in order to change everyone, I must change first myself. So why and how do I change the way I think? What makes me better than you? Literally, what? Nothing. So if I understand the gospel correctly, and I understand the words of Jesus correctly, all the accolades that I acquire throughout my life, all the financial glory, whether I'm white or black, means nothing. It's humanity. It's if I have all of these things, whether they're titles or doctorates or whatever I may acquire through education, if I acquire and amass wealth, if I do nothing to help someone else acquire to that same level of wherever I am, then I have failed. And I have failed as a Christian. So I have failed as a person who proclaims to have the love of God. The idea is, this is what I think. I think that, and I'm not saying that I would have done this, but I think that the ideal Christian is I see George Floyd with a knee on his neck. I am literally supposed to go over there and risk my life to get the knee off of his neck with complete disregard to whatever it is. No matter how my politics align with George Floyd, no matter how I feel about him, I am supposed to get the knee off the neck. If I am someone in Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, wherever, I have got to do whatever I can do to remind whomever's if someone is assaulting a friend of mine and he happens to, no matter what his color is, but especially if he's a person of color, I'm supposed to remind that individual this is a human being. He is not just a lawbreaker. He is not just a random person, a thug, or whatever you want to refer to people as. He's a human first and foremost. But where do you get to think it? Where do you start realizing that is a human? When something goes wrong, we start to dehumanize people. He was a criminal. He was a thug. He was black. So what? That he deserves to die. Where do you start the evolution of thought, of becoming aware? How do you do that? I can tell you that, as for me, I had to be lumped into the category. Sadly, if I've had an epiphany, it did not come because I saw it one day and I realized it. I had to be outcast. I had to be considered less than. And once you're down on the ground and the only person in the white people are not willing to pick you up and support you, and the only people that are black people, how do you begin to regard that? How do you begin to process that? How do you begin to hate? You don't. You begin to look at things a lot differently. And then when you become a member of I became a member of the Episcopal Church, and I began to understand social justice, and I look at it, and it's like, my calling is to make every person have the same opportunities to succeed, whatever you define success as I have. That I am a criminal. I am a felon. I have been to prison. I have had multiple chances in my life to get it right, and I have failed. But I always have the chance. Why? Now, I would say to you, just a year or so back, I would say, well, there's no such thing as white privilege because I went to prison. So how could that possibly be? But wait, there's more. Every time I come out, I have an opportunity to succeed. I have been, not by my mother, not by other people in my family, but by some folks in my family, I am not just because I'm gay, but because of my past, I am not wanted. I am not included. So I can either say the things that I need to say to get back into that position, or I can realize that everyone is my brother and we're all in this together. But the point I'm saying is, I am the outcast. So I lost my train of thought. I have had multiple opportunities to get it right because I'm white. Because I have a full complement of uncapped teeth, no tattoos, and I don't have any piercings. If I walk into a place and apply for a job, I am hired immediately. And when they find out, I am telling you, when I came out of prison and I went to find a job, they didn't check my background. I have to literally tell them what's going on with me, and they are astonished, and they find ways to justify it. Well, people make mistakes. I have literally seen people come into work where I work, and I hope this doesn't get me in some type of trouble. But I have seen them come in with way. They've been in trouble too, but less than me. And they're like, well, what do you expect? If they're late to work, what do you expect? I'm like, what does that mean? So yeah, I know that it existed. It may not exist. I may get the same treatment, but I may go to prison. I may be criminalized, but the end result isn't the same. The end result isn't the same. We do not regard. If I see if I am here today, an African American man approaches my car, will I be and he has a grill and he has tattoos and maybe that's just how he wants to look, and probably it is. Will I be as nervous and scared? Will I be as ready to call the police if he approaches my vehicle, as I would be just a slim white man or woman? And we immediately have these images in our mind that this is somebody who is who is not good, who's going to cause a problem. Up until recently, it was literally more difficult for a black man to get out of prison in the state of Alabama than it was a white man. And it was because you couldn't parole out to a housing project or a government home because a felon couldn't live there. Well, if all your family lives in government assisted housing, how are you going to get out? Well, you're not. That's another story. I mean, the idea that let's go back to something. Let's back up. I want to say this because it's very important. It's important to know. It's important to realize who George Wallace was. It's important to understand what he did, because this present administrator, this current president, has borrowed plays from that playbook in order to get to the power he has today. And it is Alabama politics at its finest. So let's have a brief history. George Wallace was not a willing racist, not a willing segregationist. He ran for office and was not successful because he did not want any part. So in the South, it used to be that if you were trash, you were white trash, which we can talk about that term too. White trash if you were in the Klan or supported that. Now, it was perfectly all right to support things like that, but you just didn't get involved in it. So the Klan comes to Wallace and he's like, look, if you want to be governor, you got to get on board with this because this is a problem. That we've had Brown versus the Board of Education. They're trying to integrate our schools. The Democrat Party is integrating schools. They're integrating the armed forces. You have got to get on board with us. And he did. And he had this fabulous speechwriter, Asa. Oh, I can't believe I forgot this man's last name. Quiet, little dumpy, fat man. Looked like he looked like nothing. Fiery, racist rhetoric. Put George Wallace on the forefront of everything. The whole right here in this town in Tuscaloosa, the schoolhouse door segregation now speech right down the road here.
Right.
This is me saying to you, it was so political. It was done on purpose. Can we talk about how George Wallace had a man castrated? Can we talk about that? Can we talk about how George Wallace had men lynched in order to prove his point? This was done in the black community, in the African American communities throughout the state of Alabama in order to prove who George Wallace was. I am a law and order president. What that means is you will not do anything unless the white man, when people say that, the law and order president, what does that mean? You will do what you're told, period. And we will use the police to enforce it, period. George Wallace realized that after the Civil Rights Act in 1964 that there was the sentiment, not just in the South, but across America, was growing. It's important to also know that a lot of the funding for Martin Luther King's civil rights movement that came from northern cities and northerners, while that seems really nice and pretty, it was not. It was because they were really kind of afraid of the black exodus into their cities. So they're like, we got to. I'm not saying this was true for everyone, but a lot of people supported the civil rights. That's right. They supported the civil rights movement because they did not want that in the North. How many white people are in Camden, New Jersey? Well, that's because they all left. Because and I'm saying that's a fact, because they did not, and not just Camden, but other places too. I'm saying because they funded the civil rights movement because they did not want the flight of people that comes to the north. Keep that. If they have the rights, perhaps they'll stay in the South. This is true. This is very researchable. And while it does not, some people may not want to hear it, it is a fact. So they are supporting George Wallace. George Wallace ran for governor. He had a wife, probably one of the least political human beings that ever walked the face. She comes from humble beginnings. She was 16 years old when he married her. And to understand how loved the segregation politics were in the state of Alabama, we elected a female governor in 1966, George Wallace's wife, because he could not launch a presidential campaign as governor and keep his governor seat should he lose. He could not do both. So he puts her in office. So in those days, Miss Lurleen had cancer. She had ovarian cancer. In those days, the doctor didn't tell the woman. They told the husband, and George did not tell her. She was completely unaware that she had ovarian cancer. Finds out into her own administration.
Really?
Correct. She finds out in 1967 that she has cancer because it's beginning to worsen. It's beginning to, by this time, I think in 61 is when she had the cancer. I think it's 5-6 years later. It begins to worsen. And she begins at that point to understand that while I am George Wallace's husband and he is leading the state through me, which was his goal as a wife, as his lesser than, because it's all about white male privilege. So you've got this woman who is my wife. I mean, can you imagine? In 1961, you're not even allowed to be told that you have ovarian cancer, but you can be governor in 1966 because you're George Wallace's wife, and still not be told that you have cancer.
That is so bizarre to me.
It's bizarre to all of us. Now it seems absolutely unrealistic. But remember that a woman could only get credit up until the 70s. A woman couldn't even get credit. She couldn't even have credit without the consent of her husband.
Right.
And in some places in the South, if a woman goes to apply for a loan, they'll still call like, Joe, your wife's over here trying to buy a car. They still do these kinds of things. I mean, she can still do it whether he likes it or not, but they still do that kind of stuff. So nevertheless, so she actually gains her own voice and begins to do wonderful things for the state. She builds a lot of schools. She takes state money. She builds a lot of schools. She institutes believe this or not, for the state of Alabama, which they have now completely destroyed, a fabulous mental health system. Tuscaloosa had a great system for people who were either criminally insane or who just had mental issues altogether. She creates mental health establishments throughout the state funded, and she dies in 1968, and Albert Brewer becomes governor. But she dies in 1968, 2 years into her term. George Wallace, without missing a beat, runs for president that year. He does not miss a beat. He doesn't. Does he stop? Absolutely not. He continues. In 1972, he begins to. People were disgruntled with Nixon. He runs for governor. Runs for president again, and probably would have won had he not been assassinated. He still carried some southern states, and perhaps even Maryland or a northern state or two, perhaps. I can't remember exactly, but George Wallace he ran on, I am afraid, y'all are afraid that these black people have these rights. Now, look, I'm your man. We're going to put this right. Here's the segregation governor. He had all this stuff under control a few years back. I'm going to run. It's these coded words, law and order, lock them up, the war on. When did all this happen? Why? So now what Nixon began to do, what the Republican Party started to do, once this really creepy faction of the Democrat Party migrated into the Republican Party, they had to embrace them. So they became Christian. They became Christian evangelicals. It became, as I call them, the white Jesus people, and they they were all embraced in that. And so you became a Christian if you were Republican. It is all about white male control. So and to appease this brand new party, they began to say things that related to them, and we began to how do we take away every time a minority or a poor person gets a way to vote, let's talk about taking that away. So is there, and I don't have to tell you or anybody that's watching this probably, but the 13th Amendment of the Constitution allows for slavery. The 13th Amendment says that you can vote, but if you're a criminal, you're a slave and therefore you cannot vote. I mean, that's the gist of it. If you're a felon, if you're a felon, you are now lost the right to vote. Well, that's in the Constitution. That's what it says. A felon cannot vote. So let's find a way to make black people felons. Let's go into their community and find things. Let's enhance laws. How many serious drug and cocaine laws existed in the 60s? Even though we know it all existed then, how many existed? How many marijuana laws that incarcerated you for years and years on at a time existed in the 1960s? They didn't. Michelle Alexander has a book, The New Jim Crow. If you haven't had an opportunity to read it, it needs to be read. It needs to be talked about. Because that book will explain to you how, in no uncertain terms, the new Jim Crow is the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system exists in order to take away the votes of, part of the reason it exists is to take away the votes of African Americans. Whenever you think, I want you, please, whenever anyone says the criminal justice system is broken, let me be the first to tell you that it is not broken. It is running exactly how they intended to.
They intended, yes.
Do not believe. Let me tell you the most fearful thing in the world right now to a wealthy white man and woman is a minority, because we no longer just have African American minorities, a minority, black or Latino or whatever, who votes and has an education, who wants to strive ahead. Is it harder? You damn right it's harder. Is it harder for some people than others? Yes, absolutely. Can some people get an education and get things they need to get ahead in life faster and better than other people? Without a doubt. What does that mean? If I am a young person of color and I want an education and I see that it's more difficult for me, then maybe I should think about, and I'm not trying to, I hope this doesn't come across as condescending, because it's not. But what I'm saying is, think about the people who walked until their feet bled so that you could have that right. Think about the people who lost their lives, who were burned, who were lynched, so that you could have that right. And
Absolutely.
then perhaps your struggle does not become so difficult. I think how we fail as humans, well, no matter what your race are, is when we see someone struggling in the education system, and they say, well, maybe it's just easier for me to drop out and to get into construction or whatever. Now, if you want to have that career as construction, that's fine. But if you really want to rise ahead and get an education, that's okay too. What we need to tell them is, it's hard for you right now. You might not graduate at 22. You might graduate at 26, but that's fine. You are not on a schedule. You do not have to compare yourselves to other people who may have better opportunities than you. What you need to compare yourself to are your ancestors and what they had to get through and what they had to go through to get the rights they had and that you are now afforded. Take full advantage of it. They died so that you, and they suffered and they bled so that you may have this opportunity. So when we see someone struggling, remind them of that. I am the son of oppressors. I am the reason these monuments stand. When I tear them, when I go there to chip at them and tear them down, and when I lose friends and family, I don't care. I do it for one reason. I do it because I'm ashamed. I am sorry. If I say, when people say, look how great we did in World War II, in the Korean War, look how great we did in the Revolutionary War. But when we turn around and say things like, "Oh, well, that's not me. That was just my ancestors that owned slaves. I didn't own them." Well, you can't claim the victory unless you also claim the spoils of victory, unless you also claim this bad history as well. You have to claim it. It is yours. It is sad. It's disgusting. If you choose to do it with pride, you deserve a lot of prayer, in my opinion. But as far as this might be your history, this is your history. But I don't have to expound on why these monuments were put up. They were put up to remind. We had with the monument that you may have seen me trying to take down in Birmingham. Birmingham didn't even exist in 1865. How do you have a monument to Civil War dead in a city that didn't even exist in the Civil War? You put that there to remind. You put that there to say, "Hey, check this out," before you get too uppity. Yeah. When did this great Confederate flag make its appearance onto state houses? When did it make its appearance on state flags in the South? When? 1948. Strom Thurmond, who was a senator from South Carolina or North Carolina,
and who had a black daughter.
Sure he did. Of course he did. But he was a senator until he was 100 and some odd years old.
Yes.
When Truman integrated the Army. Oh, Truman was a character too. So Truman sees how this World War II veteran who's just trying to claim his rights in South Carolina and trying to vote, they beat him until he's blind, and Truman finds out about it, and he becomes so appalled. And this is not history. This is assumption now, but it's probably true that he becomes so appalled at this that he integrates the Army. He integrates the Army in 1948, and the Southerners feel you can't do this. So the Southern Democrats, who have launched all of these other Democrats presidents, who the South was solidly Democrat, they could rely on it just like it's Republican now.
Right.
This is so the Confederate flag flies atop the monument, flies atop the state houses. It appears again in state flags, Mississippi, Georgia, what have you, throughout the South. Why? To let you know what your place is. This is the South. We might have lost the war, but our mentality hasn't changed. And don't you think for 1 minute that because you can join the Army with the white people that you are on par and you are equal to anyone that's white, because you're not. So when you start claiming this flag is my heritage, maybe you could have done that. I mean, just for the sake of an argument, 70 years ago. But it's not what the symbol is anymore. It's a symbol of stay in your place.
Right.
It's still a white man's world. And when I say that as a white man, let me tell you what I mean by that. Let me tell you what I mean by all of that. I feel like that because I am a Christian, it is all of our world. I should not have better opportunities because of my color. You should have as many opportunities as I have. How do we change that? When we acknowledge that there is no such thing as a better or lesser than person. When you are baptized into the church, when you become a Christian, you cannot believe that one person is better than you anymore. Now the world may recognize you as a CEO, it may recognize you as a reverend, it may recognize this other man as a doctor. That's fine. The world needs those things, but in the body of Christ, that does not exist.
Doesn't exist.
At the communion rail, everyone kneels.
Right.
It does not exist because we are all the same. And if I suffer, however it might be, if I am being oppressed, if I am losing my ability to be, if I am dehumanized, it is the objection of every person who uses the title Christian to make sure that ends not tomorrow but immediately. Immediately.
Amen. So we got some comments to you.
Oh boy.
Mandy, she's from Alabama. She said that statue's gone. So
yeah.
Yes. Let's see. David Gary is telling you to preach.
David Gary is a fabulous human being.
Hi, David. Greg, he's watching from Birmingham, Alabama. He he's listening and is with
Greg
us.
is my friend.
Huh?
He is a friend of mine.
Yes.
I'm assuming it's that Greg. It could be another one.
So, if you're listening to this, or watching this, please in the comments you can ask Perry questions as we talk, whatever you want to do. So we're here for it. We're up for it.
Right. Anything. I mean, I'm not a scholar, and I'm not all the things I know from just being here.
Oh,
just from
my cousin from Alabama is watching. My cousin Kim. She's from Montgomery.
Montgomery. Have you had a chance, Nicole, to go to the Equal Justice Initiative Museum in Montgomery?
No, I want to so bad.
It's a great place. It's a great place. If you have the opportunity, you should do that. Maybe you can go visit your long lost cousin and.
I'll probably call her right after this. Kim, I'm gonna probably call you because right after this. Greg says it's me and Michael. Oh, my aunt's watching too. Yay.
Yay.
Would you say? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I don't think I have any family watching except my church family and some people that I have known throughout time, and so Michael and Greg that are watching, we went on a whim to the rally. While we were at the rally, this is also a good narrative. We went to the rally, and while we were at the rally, there was a sort of underlying call to go tear down the monument at 7:30 that night. And we went, and I'll have to tell you that I was a little afraid of it because I understand that this destruction of property. And in the state of Alabama 2 years ago, the governor, our esteemed Governor Ivey, has put a protection on these monuments. So we were a little afraid. And do you know what we encountered while we were there? That the mayor and the police department were pretty much protecting us as long as it was the monument that was getting the focus. As long as we were.
Now that's interesting.
We were told expressly, do not touch the Korean War monument, do not touch the World War monument. Focus your attention on that monument. And that's what happened. And the police stood there and watched us do it and protected us from anything that might come about from if the Sons of Confederacy wanted to mobilize and rise again. Who knows? But they kept us there. They kept us safe.
Wow.
So a faction, there were people also at that time trying to riot in Hoover, but the Hoover police came out on force and stopped it. But these were not Alabamians. These were not people from Birmingham. This was an outside group of people and we were told they were coming, and they came. And when they came, the very first thing they did was deface the monuments that we were asked not to deface. So the mayor had to have been paying attention because he comes out flanked with Birmingham City police officers and Mayor Woodfin, and he essentially says, this is getting bad, y'all need to go. And the folks that began the riot were not people who were there to protest against that monument. They were not people who were trying to take down that monument, for the most part. I'm not saying that some didn't jump in and help, but the riot came from the people who attempted to riot in Hoover, Alabama, and failed. They came to downtown Birmingham, joined forces with whomever was willing to be a part of that downtown riot, and that's where all of the rioting and looting began in Birmingham. Because the idea was, if you want to have a focus in this city for your anger, focus it on that statue, because it does not belong here. It does not. If there is a city in Alabama that doesn't deserve or need a Civil War monument, a monument to Civil War fallen, it is definitely the city of Birmingham, because it wasn't even a city until 1871. And so it got out of hand. So of course, that's never reported on the news, and it made it sound like these people that were over here trying to tear down the monument. Now when they've asked to leave and they won't leave, now they're looting and destroying downtown Birmingham. Well, 3 of us were there and we left. We didn't loot, and there were other people who left. They left, but that's not that they weren't there altogether, and it doesn't create the greatest story. And of course, even though I'm a liberal Democrat, I will tell you the media is not always right. Please believe that. So the story is what matters. Everyone who is protesting is not rioting and who is not looting. Everyone isn't. But even if they are, can we talk about what has been stolen from people of color the past 400 years? Can we talk about that? Can we talk about rape? Can we talk about property damage? Can we talk about property loss? Can we talk about that? If you want to, is it right? The 2 wrongs make a right? Certainly not. But if you're going to be angry about property being destroyed, and that's fine, also be angry about personhood being violated. Be angry about that too. Please be angry about that. That's what I believe.
We have a question for you. Cousin Tim says, how do you feel about how people in Alabama currently feel about Governor Wallace, given the history of his reign as governor?
Well, George Wallace was a fabulous politician, and if you just take away all of the horrific crap, this is what he did. When he was so skilled at getting people on his side that he went to black churches after he was shot, and after he realized that he could never be anything but governor, he went to black churches throughout Alabama and said, "I'm sorry," and they accepted that because they were good people. It was in a church. They felt it was sincere, and they accepted it, and they continued to vote for him. Black people, the very people whom he terrorized, voted for him as for governor. How do I feel about George Wallace? It would have been better off if the bullet had made its mark. It would have been better off. It would have made in 1972. So he was a horrible man. He mistreated his wife. He abused her. He used her for his own political gain, knowing fully well that she was dying. So if you sell your soul to the devil, right? What does that mean? That means that I will do anything for my own personal gain.
That's right.
That's what it means as far as not so much a literal contract. It means that whatever it is that I am trying to accomplish in my life is more important than anything.
Right. So a priest of the Church of Satan did an interview, and he said exactly what you just said. He says, we're really not worshiping Satan. Satan is our example. What we're really saying when we say hell Satan is hell self. We worship ourself. And so,
that's right.
Yeah.
Because that's what Christianity is all about, the denial of self.
Right.
It's all about humanity as a whole, with me included, rather than me being the most important. We are all on equal footing. That's what, believe it or not, that's what Christianity is. Hard to believe, but it's true. So, white corporate Jesus says that that's not the case. Capitalistic Jesus, Republican Jesus, no, that's not the case. But in reality, Palestinian Jesus will tell you that in me, you are all the same, regardless of what you've done or haven't done. Even the person, George Floyd is equal, just as the man who put his knee on his neck and killed him is equal. We are all equal. And that is radical. And it is hard to conceptualize that there needs to be room at the table for the man that killed George Floyd as much as there is George Floyd. Wow. And that never is discussed, but it's the truth. And we cannot deny it. Now, I cannot tell you that will be easy to do, but it's what we ought to aspire to. Is that well enough said? That's the best way I know to put it. So George Wallace was willing to sell his entire being to have political power. He thirsted for it, and he got it because he was willing to do anything. He was willing to harm other human beings, even his wife, down to the mother of his children, knowing that he would run her. So no, how do I feel? Alabamians love him because they don't know this story. They don't get it. They just see, okay, well, he stood up against against the rioters and the people that were coming causing trouble in Selma or Montgomery. He stood up to them, and he ran for president, and he asked for forgiveness, so that's all good. But did he? No, he didn't ask. He asked for forgiveness, but I mean, we really can't question his motive. In theory, in practice, I don't go for it. Now, what happened to him on his deathbed? Couldn't tell you. I will tell you that his son, George Wallace III, ran for an office, a trivial office, a few years back, and was not elected.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, and so I think that there are people who understand. I mean, and let it also be said that as repulsive as he is, so is Roy Moore, and thank God we didn't elect him. I mean, let it be said, how repulsive is Roy Moore that we elected a Democrat?
So Mandy Ray, Mandy, I hope you don't mind me bringing up your comment. She said, I am an astrologer. This is the age of Aquarius paradigm. Every spiritual language has a way of describing this. Mandy, if you could type in the comments and explain further what that means, we would like to know. Kim says Jesus is transcendent of political parties. We have placed him into the mess that we've made. David says you are a better Christian than him.
That's probably not.
Michael says Roy's horse didn't even like him. And Mandy, it's all good. Thank you. Thumbs down.
Tell Mandy that I'm a Sagittarius Virgo rising with a Scorpio moon.
Did you hear that, Mandy? Oh, I know according to birthday, I fall into Aquarius. I don't know what that means for my behavior or anything or outlook, but
it's fun to think about. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But here's what I mean. I know that we've been going on for an hour, and I could be here all night. And that all I want people to know is that there are glimmers of hope in Alabama, and I cannot go out today and change everyone's mind. But I can do my part, and the first thing I can do is change my mind. And it really goes no further than that. And when people are forced to when people's thinking are challenged. When I first saw the monument, I was living in New Orleans when they started taking down the monuments to General Lee and General Beauregard, and I was appalled. I was like, oh, you can't do that. At least, and then I thought about it. I thought, we never thought about it. We never thought about it because why? Because they were always there. And it never, and you go by, you drive by them with your mother or your grandmother's like, don't remember that your great grandfather fought for the war. And then you're like, oh, that's wonderful. That's marvelous. And you think about those things, but then you realize what this symbolizes 150 years later to people whose ancestors were oppressed and subjugated. What does this mean 150, 160 years later?
Right.
It means that you are glorifying a war to keep me enslaved and oppressed.
Exactly.
We don't have time for debate. We've had the past 150 years talk about this. They need to go.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say, David Gary disagrees with me, but I personally think that if a structure was built by slaves, that it should also go. to glorify these antebellum homes that were built for free? Have we thought about that? Have we thought about all of these things that were built by slaveholders and slave owners, where they sashay and and these antebellum dresses and they act like wealthy? Have we really thought about that?
Oh my gosh. That just every time I see that, I just cringe. I mean, I live here in Dallas, and so a lot of the schools in Dallas were named after Confederate generals.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're just now starting to take down a Confederate monument in downtown. Well, I had always passed that as a little kid, and walked through that cemetery where it's at in downtown, and just was kind of like, oh, we got so used to here in the South. You just got so used to it, and then about 4 years ago, Dallas finally, I think Dallas Independent School District finally decided to rename these schools that were named after Confederate war heroes. So yeah, I think that's interesting that you say you just get so used to it, and then when you think about it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. This is horrible.
Well, sooner or later, I mean, the only thing I can think of that you can do to these fabulous old homes that were built by slaves is let's move in some black lesbians.
Oh my gosh. That'll show them.
That'll show them. Move them in and let them have it. And let's see how quickly you tend to glorify that home at that point. Some of us will. Oh, here's a great George Wallace story. Let me tell you real fast. So imagine George Wallace in 1964, right? Standing in the schoolhouse door here in Tuscaloosa saying segregation tomorrow, segregation now, segregation forever.
Right.
But in 1972, the University of Alabama, the same university whose door he stood in, elected a homecoming queen out of an African American lady, African American senior. And guess who had to put the crown on her head?
Who?
George Wallace.
I did read that this week. When I was studying him for this, I did read that this week.
True story.
Wow.
Do you have any questions?
I mean, God, this has been excellent. So, going back to the beginning, what you said. So, I guess 2 questions. I read a book called Slaves in the Family about 15 years ago. And it was about the Ball family in South Carolina having owned slaves since I think the 1640s. And those families the slave families kind of being there all through like the early 1900s, as maids or whatever. This book is about him reaching out, in the 21st century, reaching out to the descendants of the slaves that his family owned. Have you thought about doing that?
Oh, I got a great story.
Oh!
So my mother is a good woman and is always willing to challenge her thinking. Believe you me, she is nothing of the same person that she was when I was a child. So my mother is a genealogist, and and our family ancestral name in Alabama, that in Lauderdale County, Alabama. My family's been in Alabama since the 1800s. Some have been before the state, but these particular folks came on a land grant in 1826, and they bought a bunch of land and they had slaves. And his name was Horace Summerhill, and that name existed until my uncle died. There was a Horace in our family, as horrible as that name is, until last year when he passed away at 90. But anyway, so I was a bartender in Florence, and there were these African Americans at the bar who were from Rochester. Is that how you say it? New York. They were from New York. They had come down for a Summerhill family reunion. And I said, this is probably awkward for me to say, but I am also a Summerhill descendant. So naturally that got their attention.
Right.
And I said, do you? And they knew at that point in time. It had not occurred to me that their ancestors had been raped. It just occurred to me that they were descendants. It never occurred to me until later, because you aren't taught that they were raped. You were taught that, oh, well, Master had children. You just didn't. And it really wasn't my. It was his son, Horace Summerhill Jr. But we'll talk about that. Maybe we won't. But anyway, so I told my mother. I said, look, they really want to know who these people are. And my mother said, and they have every right to know. And so she sent them photographs. She sent them genealogy that went back to England, that came, because the Summerhills came over, believe it, as an indentured servant, what we talked about earlier, to Maryland in the 1800s. But this William Summerhill came over on a boat called Bristol, and he did not show back up for another 50 or 60 years, until he died. And he did not report to work. He ran to North Carolina. So he was not a good indentured servant either. But so yeah, my mother did this. Yes, absolutely. It is. I have a niece who is biracial, and so her lineage joins with mine, and therefore she is also a descendant of oppressors, and she just this past 2 weeks did an ancestry test she wanted to find out her African American side of her family. She wanted to know where in Africa, I think the DNA can pinpoint that. But she came to my mother with questions, which is, my mother's perfectly fine with it. I mean, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like my mother was never willing to tell her, but my mother gave it to her raw and uncut. She did. And for the first time, and my mother's 74, and for the first time, I didn't justify anything. She did not try to say, this is good or this is bad. She did not justify anything. I believe my grandmother had an epiphany in the 30s, and during the Depression, she almost died. And this lady named Rosalie Horton saved her life. My grandfather worked out of town. She was the wife of a hired hand, and she came into her house and saved her life. My grandmother had lost a child in 1934. In 1935, my aunt was born, and my grandmother was emaciated because she gave all of her food to her children to eat because it was a Depression. And this black lady comes in and just takes over. And she continues to help my grandmother through time. Even though there were rules that she had to go by, she could. And I met that lady, and I knew her, and I loved her. And she told me when I was a child that I would be trouble. She said, "You're going to be trouble." And it's because I didn't pay attention to any of that, because I loved her. I went to her house. I ate her food. She didn't just have to come to mine. I went to hers. I drove my little bicycle to where she lived in Elgin, Alabama, and I loved her and love her still. And I never thought about what she has gone through until recently. I never thought about the things that she suffered until recently. And there is a picture. If you want to share it, feel free to. I don't know how on this platform, and if you can't,
yeah, please, thank you.
I don't know how, but yeah, I guess I can. I can put it in the comments. I've got another phone here.
Perfect.
That maybe it's not letting me do it, but if you want to share it at some point, or if there's a way to do it, I don't really know. But she was a wonderful woman, and you cannot, when you start to think about things, you have to remember all of these people. That I think about how Ma Rosa did not care that my grandmother was white, did not care that my grandfather was a raging racist. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm talking about. She cared that my grandmother was sick and in need. That was focused on. She was not concerned about her status in society being here. She was concerned about her being in a bad state, and she helped her not out of humanity. So what I'm calling for, I guess, in this whole thing is let us reach out to each other in humanity, not in race, but in humanity, and do what's right for humanity. Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Somebody said, "Oh, Kim, I can listen to you all night long."
Yeah, I can go
Gary,
all night long.
Gary, please share. You can share it even now. So it's gonna stay up. So please share. This is too good not to.
Thank you for this.
Thank you. We might have to have part 2 of this because I just like have more questions in my head. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I need to ask more questions.
Ask them if they're willing to stick around, or if they're not, it's going to be here. So just ask.
Astronomy is important. Okay.
It is. I agree with that. Oh, we had to clean out my uncle.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to tell you this. So my uncle was a Democrat until the day he died last year, age 90. And he has no heirs. His children passed away years ago. And we're having to clean out his house, and he never threw anything away. He had old poll taxes from where he paid the poll tax in order to vote. And he had this old wallet, and it was a Confederate dollar, and it said, "Save your Confederate money, boys. The South will rise again." And I'm like, oh, how terrible. Which now, it was tucked away and saved. It wasn't something he visited or anything. It was just something he saved, and it just happened. He carried it with him, and this wallet was from the 50s and 60s. In his more recent things, we found a laminated photograph of Barack and Michelle Obama, and where he donated handsomely to 2 campaigns. And in that, I understand that if people, given time, maybe they don't get to where we want them to be, but at least there are advances. And anytime that you do something for somebody where you deny your own, if in the story of the Good Samaritan, we have the age-old story of the Jew and the Samaritan, and so let's replace that. There is a white man dying on the road, and every other white man passes by him because he's bleeding out and he's dying, and a black man picks him up and takes him to the inn and pays for his medical treatment and pays for his housing. And then it becomes more powerful. Then we understand that it's never about, anytime we deny how we feel. I may hate you because your politics are different than mine. I may not like you because you come from a different place in life than I come from. You know, your community is different than mine. I may not like any of that. But the one thing that we have in common is that we are people. So every time I deny myself for the greater cause of humanity, not only am I promoting the gospel of Christ, I am becoming a better person. Anytime I can say, you know what, you might have on a Trump 2020 shirt and a rebel flag in your hand, but you're dying. Do I walk by you, or do I treat you? Do I help you? So anytime we do that, because my grandmother was a completely different person about race and racism after a black lady came and helped her, when her own family, which they didn't know. The only reason Ma Rosa knew was because her husband was working in the fields and she was working with him, and she found this out. But those sorts of things, we need violence sometimes too. There's a time for everything, but those sorts of things are what brings people into a different place. When you deny yourself, when you deny your own selfish desire, whether it's to walk on by, because in the story of the Good Samaritan, there's a man going to church. Well, I'm going to church. I don't have time for this. When you deny that desire to do something else and step by and do something human, if it's knock a man off of another man's neck, you have promoted the gospel of Christ. You have become a better human, and you are spreading love and goodness, and yeah. Let me stop, because I'll just beat the horse to death. But
wow, this is amazing. Long way. Are you seeing the comments?
I can look on here and see them.
Uh,
The first I see is Roy's horse. Didn't even like him. Let me put him his first.
but
So
is Alabama Central Time, right?
yeah, yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
good.
Yeah. So yes, and I made a post the other day, and someone said, "Can we just talk about this with common sense and reason? And why can't we just?" I said, "We tried all that,
Right?
You know, and some. My dad told me, and he was a good man in his own way. But my dad told me, he said, fighting is not something you do first. He said, try to have a decent conversation with the person and assume that they're on the same level that you are. Assume that they're as intelligent as you and try to talk it out. And if that's not the language they understand, in order for you to gain respect, then speak the language they understand in order for you to get your point across. In other words, exhaust the peace and then beat the hell out of them. You know, and maybe that's not the gospel of Christ, but I'm saying the point I'm making is, the point I'm making is, as raw as that is, the point I'm making is sometimes being quiet just isn't working. It might work in some instances. It might work in the instance of my grandmother and Rosa Lee Hardin, and it might work in the instance of Martin Luther King. But sometimes people need to get attention. They need to scream and yell. When a child is not fed, what does it do? It screams and it yells and it throws a tantrum. And I'm not saying that this is childish. The point I'm making is people are screaming and they're yelling in order to get what it is that they want, that they are not afforded, which is treat me like a regular human being. Give me every chance. Give me every option. When I tell you I cannot breathe, get off of me. When I tell you that you are doing too much, why can't you? If you feel like you need to detain me, then please use your pepper spray and every other weapon in your arsenal that doesn't kill me in order to get me to comply.
Right.
Don't just instantly say, well, you know what? I'm going to snuff this life out because he's a criminal. Stop putting those tags on people. Human life is worth more than that. Criminals can be redeemed, but they will never be redeemed. No one will ever have redemption if you just believe that they are worthless. How can you have redemption? Means you redeem a coupon, don't you? Isn't a coupon just a piece of paper until redemption? That's what it means. Redeem me, make me worth something, make me valuable. Well, how do you do that? I need to give you money? No. You treat me like I am to be treated. What is the opposite of wealth? Justice. Treat me like you need to be treated, like I deserve to be treated, like a person, like a human. Redeem me. I am no longer trash. I'm no longer a felon. I don't regard me as the world regards me with these titles, whether it's felon or reverend or doctor or failure. Regard me as a human.
Right.
Treat me like a person. This will bring me to your level. Now, when you treat me like that and you see me as that, I can achieve the same titles and accolades that you have and be brought back into society so that perhaps God, willing, and hopefully, I give back to the people that I once destroyed. You know, my grandmother told me, she said, go out there and pick them plums for me when I'd gotten out of prison. She said, go out there and pick them plums for me. So I got the ladder, and she said, no, I don't want the ones that are on the top. I want the ones that have fallen because they're sweeter. And she was making a point. And that's the most beautiful thing in the world. The people who have been, these rotten plums on the ground now make the greatest jelly. So you cannot be anything until you are redeemed. And if you are wealthy and you are not helping your fellow man, if you have accolades and titles and you can educate and you're not doing that, you're only helping other wealthy, you are doing nothing. You're not doing enough. Am I doing enough? Absolutely not.
Me neither.
Absolutely. Can I do more? Yes, I can. I don't know how. May I be taught how? May I be shown how? That's all I want to say as far as that's concerned. Redemption. Who does God deny a place at the table? Please tell me now. No one who is willing to come. We should not look at people according to what they have done wrong, or maybe what even they've done right. We should look at them as what? Humans. They are people. They are the beloved of God, period. They're
Preach.
I'm done. I got to be done. We'll be here forever. We'll be here all night, Nicole.
Preach. Oh my gosh. Perry, I can't thank you enough for doing this. Hopefully we get to do this again.
It's mine. Anytime.
And for those of us who, I guess, doesn't matter who you are, we all struggle with this. Perry, can you end us with prayer and pray for our hearts and the hearts of people who are watching, that we follow in the Lord's footsteps in this?
In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I am a failure, but you make me something because you believe in me. Help me and the rest of us to view other people's lives as valuable as we do each other's, regardless and in spite of what they've done or have not done. Let us all be equal and unite to strive to help each other be better people and to follow your example of being a better person.
Yes.
Let us be what you want us to be. Amen.
Amen and amen. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, thank you for hanging out with us tonight, and hope you can do it again. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.